Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. We do educational videos over here, and we focus on the obscure and on great theories of everything. People who spent their whole life working on something, an all-encompassing project, and probably never got the credit they deserved, much less the money. But usually it is a grand unified theory, a cosmology, and we try to help you to suss these things out so that you can use them in your own life, help you with your paradigm shifting, your quest for better physical, mental, and spiritual health, your awakening to 5D consciousness. And today is our 90th video that we've done on the book called Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha from Dr. Daniel Ingram. And this really is described by its title. It's not really about Buddhism per se, but about the core teachings of the Buddha. Whether you believe in Buddha or not, what Ingram really does here is he gives us the tools we need to succeed in meditation, both concentration meditation, meditation on an object, and insight meditation, or vipassana, which is opening up our senses and our mental impressions to investigation for the three characteristics of impermanence, dissatisfactoriness, and no self. All of our sensations have those characteristics, and as we recognize that, we move around the stages of insight. And each time we cycle through, we get enlightened by degrees, or we attain wisdom by degrees. And we are toward the end of this book in the part where Ingram is really talking about his autobiographical journey. And we just left off here at a place where, Ingram is a big geek about maps and knowing where we are, what stage you're in, or even what sub-stage you're in, so that you can kind of keep track of your progress, figure out whether you're doing things right or not, and, just really taking advantage of this 2,500-year tradition of thousands of people having gone through this same experience. That's why I'm really saying this. Buddhism isn't so much of a religion as it is of a science. They contend that these different experiences are reproducible. Everybody goes through them. Maybe some slight discrepancies based on our conditioning and our culture and all that, but these are really hardwired. And but Ingram, after his third or fourth path around the cycles of insight, thinks that he should be at a certain stage, but he's not. He really relied on the maps for his first 2 or 3 cycles, and the maps were all right there for him. They were very, very accurate in describing his progress. But now, all of a sudden, they're not. And so he's confused. And so that's where we're going to start right now. So this is chapter 55. It's called Map Failure. Confused and frustrated, I went on another retreat with Christopher Titmus, Sharda Rogel, and Guy Armstrong. That retreat was mostly just about cycling and frustration, as I got the sense that there was something key that I should finally realize, but I didn't know what it was. This was the retreat where Sharda gave me the excellent advice to watch the motion of attraction and aversion that I didn't have the good sense at the time to follow. While Christopher pointed very clearly and directly to an immediacy of freedom here and now, which was one of his strongest and most appreciated emphases. I was too immature in my practice to really get what he was talking about. I think that seeds from Sharda's calm and straightforward advice and Christopher's passionate awakeness were planted that would finally sprout about 6 years later. Christopher and Sharda weren't map people, and I was highly mappy, so our interactions were not optimal. Excuse me. Map fixation prevented me from being able to hear or heed their wise words, which were stated with profound clarity and likewise prevented me from seeing and appreciating their behavior, which deeply embodied integrity and kindness. Maps prevented me from truly accepting my own experience there and then. Avoid similar mistakes if you can, but if you make them, resolve to learn something from those mistakes and don't repeat them. Despite more cycles, I still wasn't that different from what I thought of as third path. And at this point, I was in the beginning of the 27 or so full-blown insight cycles I now think of as small path cycles that would occur between early 1997 and April 2003. Some were quick, taking perhaps 2 weeks. Others took a few months, but they were all nearly the same in most ways. After each one, there would be a brief period of a few days where it seemed everything was sorted out, duality had resolved itself, everything was happening on its own. There was nobody in the assemblage of parts called Daniel, just the process of sensations occurring that make up Daniel. Then subtle signs of distortions in perception, of the subtle illusion of will, of the sense of separateness that would begin to occur. And the understanding would come. Nope, this is not it yet. Something was wrong, and I had no idea what it was. Bill Hamilton's famous warning about 12th path and that the errant fractal is vast came in handy here, helping to normalize a process that otherwise could have been more frustrating than it was. So the maps helped, hurt, empowered, and screwed things up. Such is the nature of all conditioned things. I had started reapplying to medical schools at the time, but I didn't get in, so I went to public health school, which was very engaging, useful, and hopefully would allow me to do something helpful about the health problems I had seen both up close and personal working in India and had spoken of with people at the CDC's National AIDS Hotline. Graduate school also would allow me a reasonable amount of practice and Bhavana Society retreat time, as well as time to write. Practice at this point consisted of a lot of just paying attention to everything, a lot of cycling, a lot of jhana practice, cycling from jhanas 1 through 8 most nights, when lying down before going to sleep became part of my nighttime ritual for about a decade. Some jhana and nana slam shifting, and a whole lot of frustration as I couldn't finish the thing up. I also felt psychologically pretty stressed out. I also seriously delved into phenomenology during this period. The reasons for this are many, but most significantly, I wanted to restore my damaged friendships with Kenneth Folk and Bill Hamilton, both of whom were still convinced I was a hyper-delusional dark night yogi before first path. That disparity of Dharma diagnosis between us combined with our own immature morality practices to turn the Dharma into friendship poison for a very long time. In retrospect, with the benefit of 2 more decades of practice, Kenneth and I finally agree that our capacity to rationalize our own neurotic assholishness was and perhaps is remarkable. However, at the time, I had this odd notion that should my phenomenology be so airtight as to admit to no other possible Dharma diagnosis than where I thought I was, they would be convinced, relaxed, and we would all have a great time talking about and sharing our experiences and Dharma adventures, and would get back to being friends. Hopefully, nobody reading this will miss the obvious point that rigorous Dharma phenomenology is hardly a basis for a real friendship or for resolution of deep conflicts of identity and role. Bill died of pancreatic cancer before any such resolution of our conflicts could occur, and disagreements with Kenneth about the Dharma would continue to add a toxic element to our old and deep friendship for almost 2 decades. The take-home here is do your best not to have these sorts of issues ruin your human relationships. Unfortunately, as I have learned the hard way, preventing this is sometimes very hard. Pure insight into the fundamental nature of phenomena on its own is not enough to solve anything like this. To foster healthy human relationships in the face of Dharma practice, I would look to underrated and often rare skill sets and personal characteristics, such as communication skills, morality, psychological health, forgiveness, and reasonably healthy boundaries, among other things. I should mention that it is a true tragedy that Bill Hamilton died before he wrote much down, and certainly before he wrote down the depths of his meditation classification system and theory related to subjhanas, subnanas, fractals, and the like. One of the reasons I began writing was that I was scared that I too could die before having written down as much as possible of what I could share, including important and useful techniques and bits of theory that Bill taught me. Thus, reality found itself with a precocious, fearful, obsessed, hyper-intellectual, competitive, ultra-high energy, immature brat writing a very unusual hardcore Dharma book. With this second edition, which benefits from many more years of practice and life experience, I have tried to add more balance, and perhaps when my practice is more mature, I will manage to optimize that balance better. That is the end of the chapter, and chapter 56 is called Wandering. It was during this time, specifically 1998 or so, when the dark side of misapplied Dharma practice was interfering with my initial Dharma friendship, that I met Robert Burns. He is now the ex-husband of my sister's husband's sister, aka my ex-brother-in-law. He was into ceremonial magic and was a very heavy thelemic practitioner. With him being my one close meditation friend at the time, I spent a whole lot of time reading various books about magic, experimenting with various magical techniques, and doing a lot of concentration practices involving kasinas, trying to draw lines in the air and visualizing various archetypal images and geometric designs, etc. Robert and I spent long hours over many months trying to correlate the stages in the maps of our various traditions and the correlations with the stages of insight and the Sephiro came from those conversations. He and his ex-wife, my sister's husband's sister, also gave me my first website and named it www.interactivebuddha.com. And he hosted it on his server for the first 10 years of its existence, for which I am very grateful. Magical work helped fill in the far other end of the developmental spectrum for me, being about meaning, symbols, and content. It was about feelings, desires, fears, empowerment, intuition, creativity, and the specifics of life. One of the shadow sides of relentless focus on vipassana, impermanence, suffering, and the like is that we can become so down on the life-giving side of the spiritual equation and neglect meaning and content. So magic helped me begin to correct some of that imbalance. In magic, that's magic with a K every time here. In magic, colors mattered, words mattered, archetypes mattered, dreams mattered, relationships mattered, feelings mattered. It is not that the practices I had been doing on the tradition in which I had been practicing in necessarily devalued, that I had been practicing in necessarily devalued those aspects of life, but my interpretation of those traditions and practices did. While all those aspects of life were clearly very relevant in a Buddhist context in which morality has been adequately understood and sufficiently cultivated prior to meditation, magic had this deep cultural resonance for me. The heroes of my youth were not Padmasambhava or Asian mythical creatures such as Garudas and Nagas, but Gandalf, elves, fairies, and dragons. Wands mean more to me than Dorhees at some deep level. Not that I don't like a Dorhee now and then. Western magical tradition could unlock forgotten places and play to deep, heart-related areas that Buddhist symbolism just couldn't do for me. I get goosebumps when I read Harry Potter. It is just the culture I grew up in. Someone growing up in a different culture would likely have different triggers for similar reactions. One day I think there will be a translation of Tantra into Western iconography, but until then I draw on the iconography and myths of both Eastern and Western traditions to meet my needs. For me, magic was like the deep end of psychotherapy for meditators, plus a whole lot more. I got a lot out of it then and still do. From about 1998 to late 1999, Robert was basically the only friend with whom I consistently conversed about meditation. I had a brief period in late 1996 to 1998 where I tried to be involved in various local meditation groups in North Carolina, but I found them all very frustrating and felt like I was into something very different from what the rest of the participants were interested in. So the fit was extremely awkward. I did meet some very nice, good people in those groups, but I finally gave up on being part of a local group. As confirmed by many similarly solid practitioners with whom I have communicated since then, mostly as a result of the internet, and therefore about a decade later, when you have such a radically different set of abilities and have undergone such complex paradigmatic and perceptual transformations, it's very hard to be around those who see the Dharma more as a club, social scene, church, hobby, recreational activity, fancy feather in their cap, set of fascinating beliefs, exotic self-identification, job, or something beyond questioning. I found that while people like to imagine that they were self-identified as Buddhists and purportedly into Buddhism, when I talked about the fascinating results that actual Buddhist practice can produce, all hell would break loose. That said, part of the problem was no doubt me and my presentation style, and I try to own that in relative terms as best I can. My own real arrogance about my practice, coupled with my honesty, hyper-enthusiastic, heartfelt desire to help spread knowledge of these outrageously incredible methods, collided with the other practitioners' deep-seated beliefs or existential insecurities that there was no possible way someone like me, or perhaps anyone alive today, could possibly have done what I did, experience what I was experiencing, or know what I knew. Any possibility of that experience being the case was so threatening to their view of how the world worked that the results ranged from very polite disdain, followed by their avoiding or shunning me, to actual snarls and people verbally assaulting me. Then I would go home and sit down and experience all the things they insisted were impossible. So yeah, I was in those same circles, and I had like really very similar experiences from the people in Chapel Hill. Everything was just like a big social thing, and nobody was serious at all about trying to accomplish anything in these meditation groups or these New Age. You know, it was really, really something. And I mean, I was nowhere near as advanced as he was, but even me, I was just serious about it. They really weren't. It was just kind of like almost like a Bermuda Triangle of just misfits, not really getting what was going on, and just kind of turning everything into a social thing, turning everything into a potluck. But anyway, there were some very nice people that I met. But I did absolutely experience the, where was he saying, avoiding or shunning me, to actual snarls and people verbally assaulting me. Like when you could just kind of also hear like the room go quiet whenever you said something that was kind of across the line of what was taboo, what was acceptable and what was not acceptable, which was all defined by like the New York Times and NPR or something like that. So anyway, I was alone and struggling to, but I'd like to see a picture of Ingram. I haven't looked him up because I'm sure I must have known him, but it's a small town. And it looks like we were kind of there together for like at least a decade. I was alone and struggling to find companions on this strange path, particularly anyone who knew more than I did, to help me finish what I wished to finish. Those in most local groups were largely united in their view that I shouldn't exist, was seriously delusional, and should at least shut up, if not immediately vanish. Now, let me add that there were a few people who would warily listen and perhaps process something of what I had to offer, but that was so rare as to leave me feeling worse about the possibility of finding any real community than when the conversation started. Luckily, years later, the internet has allowed these few people who really like to explore the deep end of meditation and talk about it to come together virtually on forums, Skype, Google Chat, etc., as well as occasionally to gather in meet space to talk and share. And I am extremely grateful to be able to finally participate in such a community. Back to the more linear narrative, other things that fascinated me during the time from around 1997 to 2002 were Vajrayana, Dzogchen, the writings of Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, particularly the 9th chapter of his book called Journey Without Goal, about 5 Buddha families, which describes various archetypal energies, and qualities of being, and how these relate to skillful and unskillful ways of being in the world. It seemed to fill in human dimensions of theory that I had been lacking. And so that period involved a lot of time spent relating to such energies, to the transformation of various defilements into their awakened counterparts, a view that saw them all as energetic, colorful qualities moving in the world that could either be experienced in the light of duality or in the light of their essential nature. This point of view now made vastly more experiential sense to me than the traditional 10 fetter model, as it is usually explained. I also really like Trungpa Rinpoche's book, Training the Mind and Cultivating Loving Kindness, and the Tonglen practice he describes there. I spent a reasonable amount of time of my formal practice doing that, and the Brahma Viharas, along with my other strange, magical, and more exploratory Vipassana work, as the cycles were the cycles, and those practices, more than anything, seemed to move these cycles along quickly, which seemed like a good idea and probably was. The Vajrayana teachings, even in the very limited, distorted, translated, indirect way they came to me, had the profound effect of largely liberating me from the ideals related to eliminating the negative emotions by way of suppression or repression. This had the good effect on my insight practice of really allowing me to embrace whatever came up, however it was. My ideals based on the Theravada had largely been shattered by that point, as their traditional models simply didn't line up well enough with my experience anymore to make any sense to me. The Vajrayana concept of embracing all energetic emotional qualities to bring the light of wisdom to them made vastly more sense and allowed me to open to depths of my emotional life that I suspect would have been much harder had I been laboring under the Theravada models. Simultaneously, this also lowered my standards for my emotional life in relative terms, which probably wasn't helpful or necessary. It is hard to spend hours on the cushion totally embracing our emotions, however they are, and not have that cause some shadow side of too much unrestrained behavior when off the cushion. The Vajrayana kids know this all too well, hence the emphasis on establishing a firm foundation in morality, the preliminaries, warnings, bodhisattva vows, and safeguards that always traditionally accompany these teachings. Also helpful in that period was Padmasambhava's The Light of Wisdom, with commentary by Jamgon Kongtrul Rinpoche the Great, as well as tracing back the radiance from the teachings of Chinul, a Korean Chan monk, which Joseph Goldstein had recommended to me for the general territory he felt I was in. I was also influenced by Introduction to Tantra by Lama Yeshe, and later by Secret of the Vajna World by Reginald Ray, as well as texts such as Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand by Pebonka Rinpoche. I read a lot of Taoist material in odd sources like the beautiful cartoon books of Sai Chi Chung, such as The Roots of Wisdom, which is not strictly Taoist but is in the ballpark. I read Moon in a Dewdrop about the teachings of Dogen many times. This is a very incomplete list, but it gives you a sense of my interest and what I resonated with at the time. Despite reading lots of books, I still found nothing that really mapped out what I was going through, or that clearly explained how to dissolve the last little annoying remnants of dualistic illusion in a way that I could understand at the time. Descriptions of the high end of the middle paths are very hard to come by. and good advice even harder. So I wandered a bit, explored and pursued all sorts of strange paths that might be considered either distractions from a purist point of view or a well-rounded education in developing more broadly. Okay, we are at chapter 57 now, called Kasanas, Powers, and Retreats. And we'll get into a couple paragraphs of this. I had a period where I became more and more interested in the jhanas and powers. So in 1999, just before medical school began, I went on a work retreat for 2 months at Gaia House in Devon, England. Having gone there to continue study with Christopher Titmuss and meet with Christina Feldman to talk about strong concentration and the powers. This latter goal based on the recommendation of Joseph Goldstein, who felt she would be the right person to talk with about those topics. As background reading, I had pored over the standard sources such as the Vimuttamagga and the Visuddhimagga, both basically the high concentration versions of grimoires, along with the standard Pali canonical sources, as well as texts like Bhante Gunaratana, the something in Theravada Buddhist meditation. Sometimes the type superimposes over itself, and so there's like 3 letters typed over the same space. And the Path of Serenity and Insight, and some standard magical texts in the Western tradition. Christina Feldman gave me some excellent advice in a few short minutes, and with a degree of fervor and energy that I have rarely seen or felt in a Dharma teacher. She gave me that advice to me very reluctantly and with grave reservations, particularly after I mentioned to her a few things about my own assessment of my practice, and that I was interested in the powers, statements that should reasonably give any meditation teacher cause for concern. Yet in her blazingly powerful passion for the topic, she couldn't seem to help but transmit something to me despite her clear wish to do otherwise. Okay, I think we're going to stop right there, and we will find out what Christina Feldman's advice to Dr. Daniel Ingram is tomorrow when we return. So please stick with it and join me tomorrow. Thanks for tuning in today.